Okay. So welcome everybody. What we're going to do today is I have four of my favorite people here from shelter management, shelter direction. And what I wanted to do is give you guys the opportunity to talk with them about their experiences of working with veterinarians in shelters. So you can really find out what those relationships are like, what kinds of jobs there are, what the expectations are, what things work, what things don't work. So this is an amazing opportunity for you guys to ask questions. So please come up with questions. If you don't have questions, then I'll ask questions for you. But who we have with us is, I'm going to start with the disembodied voices that are here. Is Dr. Martha Smith from the Animal Rescue League. And Martha will have to tell you what her current title is, but she was also the interim director of Animal Rescue League. And Sharon Harvey from the Cleveland Animal Protection League. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves. I just want you to know who's here. We have Ann Reed from Wisconsin Humane Society in Milwaukee, and Racine, and Ozaki, and Pam McLeod-Smith from the Dane County Humane Society. So I'm going to start with them because I think it's easier for them to get kind of left out. So Sharon, will you start us off?
I sure will. Well, I'm Sharon from the Cleveland Animal Protective League, and we are a private nonprofit shelter. We have considered ourselves to be what is now commonly referred to as a managed admissions shelter, which means we're open, but we do require that owners make appointments. We serve about 17,000 animals each year. We're kind of a half and half between animals that come to us for possible sheltering and placement, and then the others are TNR, trap, neuter, return cats, and then animals that we sterilize for other rescues and shelters, which is a nice segue into the fact that we are so fortunate to have a wonderful medical team. We operate 2 internal clinics. We don't provide services for the public at this point in time, but one that is for our shelter animals, where we do all of our spay-neuter surgeries, and we do our second chance program surgeries and treatments for animals that come in with injuries and illnesses that are within our resources to provide care for. And then the other clinic is where we do the adoptable animals and feral cats from outside the building. On staff, we have 1 full-time shelter medicine veterinarian who is our head of veterinary services, and then under her, she has a phenomenal team that consists of the 2 full-time equivalent surgeons, and then our registered vet techs and clinic assistants.
And Cleveland APM is also an ASPCA partner community, and you have been for how long?
This is actually our last year, so it will be either 5 or 6 years now. I've lost track. I've been here 6, so I guess it's been 5 years now.
Cool. All right, thank you, Sharon. Martha.
You're welcome.
Hello. So I'm Martha Smith Blackmore, and I am a veterinarian. My current title at the Animal Rescue League of Boston is Vice President of Animal Welfare. I started as a shelter veterinarian with this organization in 2001 and became the Director of Veterinary Medical Services in 2006. And as Sandra pointed out, I spent the last year being president and took that time to consider whether or not I wanted to be the president. And when a colleague of mine who transitioned from being a shelter veterinarian to being the leader of a very large nonprofit animal welfare organization said it was something akin to pulling your soul out of your nose and stick with the animal operational side. So I oversee our 3 animal shelters, and like Cleveland, we're sort of a planned admission organization. We have an outpatient veterinary clinic. We have a mobile spay-neuter clinic. We run 6 TNR clinics a year. We have 3 shelter veterinarians, 1 for each of our facilities, and we also run the Center for Shelter Dogs, which is an online resource that's free to shelters, whoever want to access our webinars or our information there, to help shelters learn about the impact of stress and enrichment and how we can make lives better for dogs and shelters in in order to reduce the length of stay and get them into homes. So we also have a technical rescue department that goes out on thin ice, goes up in tall trees and rescues animals that are in peril. And we have a law enforcement department that investigates and prosecutes animal cruelty. And I get most involved with them, besides overseeing them now, I also do a fair amount of veterinary forensics.
Dr. Smith, also speaking of pulling your soul out your nose, was one of the 4 editors for the Shelter Standards document that we talked about last week. I am.
There was a little soul pulling there too.
Yeah.
It was my nose that came out of it.
My name is Ann Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Humane Society. I have been for 3 years. I had no animal welfare background before that. I was a lawyer from 81 to 2009. I just saw a T-shirt or something on Facebook that said, I was an English major, you do the math, and that really sort of describes, I think, my relationship sometimes with our vets. We are, at this point, still primarily focused on our shelter work and really in a moment where we're going from some significant community outreach to trying to get to a much more significant place in community outreach. But our shelter work is very extensive. We have 3 locations. Until this past January 1st, it was 2. Ozaki, which is the previously separate Ozaki Humane Society, which we acquired in something like 2004. But then as of January 1, Countryside Humane Society, which was the main shelter in Racine, had reached out to us, and we acquired them as well. So we're now operating 3 locations across something like 60 miles. Across the organizations, we will have something like 10 or 11,000 adoptions this year. We have transitioned during my time there from true open admission, walk-in, no appointments, to right now we are at appointments very strongly suggested, but we still will take your animal if you come in without one most of the time. And we're trying to transition to more of managed admission. We do not do stray sheltering in Milwaukee County. That's done by a separate organization. We've done it in Ozaki County for some time, but if you know Ozaki, you know that's not really heavy duty. In Racine, however, we are doing stray sheltering, and so we're really doing stray sheltering in high volume for the first time ever, just over the last few weeks. We have 4, I'm just so lucky, we have 4 full-time veterinarians at Milwaukee, 1 at Ozaki, 1 at Racine. Roughly the same number of certified vet techs in each location, and then significant veterinary staff built out under that. We do about 5,000 to 6,000 shelter spay neuters of our shelter animals every year. That happens because we make the promise to every animal in the adoption program, as does everybody else sitting here, that they have as long as it takes to go home. We're able to do that spay neuter on the front end, so it becomes the beginning of the process. We do 800 or 900 low-income spay neuters from the community each year. You can put a 0 on that and still not hit the need. So we're really focusing on expanding that out. Mainly, frankly, a function of the limitations of our building in terms of housing privately owned and shelter animals separately. We've got the people, we've got the capacity, we've got the time, but right now we don't have the right physical location for recovery. What else? Yeah, that's good enough.
One of the things, I'll add my what else, is one of the things that's, I think, that Wisconsin Humane does really remarkably well that Ann didn't talk about is transfer in animals.
Yes.
From fairly large distances sometimes, but also right close by, and they are really the masters of getting those animals in, turning them around, and sending them on their way, which we will talk about in the next few sessions, but they're really an amazing example of doing that.
Well, we are standard Newberry length of stay acolytes, and so we really focus on length of stay.
Cant.
Yep, I'm Pam McLeod-Smith. I'm the director at Dane County Humane Society. I've been employed there since 91, so 22 years, but I've been the director since 2002. I actually started as a volunteer in the late 80s, and so I guess you could say I'm kind of a lifer. It's in my blood, and I really enjoy it, obviously. We're fortunate to have 2 full-time veterinarians at our main shelter. And then we have an SOS program, which is Shelter Outreach Services. We have had for several years that Sandra started when she was our vet at DCHS. And so that program was traveling around doing mobile spay-neuters, and it helps some specific organizations that don't have vets on staff and couldn't provide spay-neuter in their communities. And we recently, at the end of last year, dissolved that program because we were fortunate enough to have somebody donate the use of a building to us in Mount Horeb. And so just this month we're opening a spay-neuter clinic for cats in Mount Horeb. And so we just hired a part-time vet there, and we also have 3 other part-time vets that work at the main shelter that help us with spay-neuter. And then we have a couple relief vets that help cover when our full-time vets are not available. And I'm trying to think of other. And then obviously Sandra Newberry is our consultant, and so she's heavily involved in our structure as well and helping us with our animal population management and everything else. But one unique thing is we have a leadership team, and so we really function as a team at Dane County Humane Society. And so we have a representative from each area of our operations on the leadership team. So we have an adoptions manager, a development director, an accounting and building manager, and an animal operations manager, and then an animal medical services manager. So our animal medical services manager works closely with our 2 full-time vets, and they work as a team as far as our animal medical programs and procedures go. And so our vets are in charge of all of the medical protocols and anything related to that, and they consult with Sandra as well. And then our manager runs the personnel of the clinic and the inventory and the general operations of the clinic itself. And so it's a new structure. We've tried many, as Sandra can also attest to when she was there. And it's so important to have the vets' input and role as part of the leadership of the shelter, but we also want to make sure that we keep a good balance so that they aren't getting pulled into too many administrative things, and that the focus is on the veterinary aspects of the job, because they're the only ones that can serve that function for us. And so that's been something that we've worked through over the years to try and find a good balance and match so that we can accomplish everything that we want to.
Thank you all. So I have a couple of questions, but I want to see if you guys have questions first. You can't be shy, because your reputation from UW is that you guys are all not shy and really good at asking questions. So you can't be too shy. Yeah.
Well, I had a question as a follow-up from last week that you suggested.
Yeah.
So, and it's really for anyone, I guess, mainly pertaining especially to low resource shelters. I know animal welfare is a pretty subjective thing sometimes, even with guidelines being followed and things. It's kind of somewhat a matter of opinion sometimes, and also a matter of just physical restrictions of shelters and what staff and shelter directors feel like they can and can't accommodate. And of course there are boards that get involved, and it gets pretty messy pretty quickly to make policies and management protocols for animal welfare. So I was wondering, just as a vet coming in, or any member of the public who has an animal welfare concern, how do you approach that at a shelter without appearing that you're stepping on toes and, remaining diplomatic and
So
yeah.
let me try to, I'm going to repeat it just to make sure that Martha and Sharon and the online
I
folks.
could not understand that.
Yep. So the question, the short end of the question is, especially in low resource shelters, but in all shelters, as a veterinarian especially, how do you try to bring concerns that you might have for animal welfare in the shelter forward? What's the best way of doing that? What are your experiences of how that's been the most effective? Does that, yep, okay, so that sums up the question. And whoever,
Who's asking, the vet would have the concern?
Yeah, so
Just
if-
as a member of the community, or
as a veterinarian.
As a veterinarian primarily, yes, but I mean, just as a person, if you have an animal welfare concern, especially as a vet, so you have that professional.
but you don't work in, this is a vet
Let's leave it
outside
to the
shelter.
vet in the shelter.
In the shelter,
Let's leave
okay.
it to the vet in the shelter. So you're working in a shelter and you have animal welfare concerns. what are your experiences about ways that that's been brought forward that are good, and maybe even I can say from my perspective, sometimes those concerns get brought forward in less constructive ways as well. But let's start with the constructive ways.
Well, can I start with an answer?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Martha's on that one. Being a veterinarian.
Yeah, early in my career, before our organization had sort of the shape it has now, I reported to, so as a veterinarian with a few years of experience under my belt, and I was reporting to, my boss was the shelter manager who was a high school graduate and who did not observe the same things I observed the way I saw them and did not appreciate my concern for priorities. And there was one particular case where our rescue had brought in an owl who crash landed into a bucket of oil that had been drained from a vehicle where the guy was doing oil changes. I don't know if the bird saw its reflection or what, but I went right into it. And she ordered the rescue agents to set the bird up, and it could be dealt with the next day because there was some furniture to be assembled. And I went a bit haywire for that bird and ended up having employee counseling and have a disciplinary letter put in my file, and went to employee assistance counseling with my then boss, and we learned how to work through concerns and raise concerns appropriately. And to this day, I carry some resentment because the bird did get transferred that day to a wildlife center, and it did die. But to this day, I still am bothered by the fact that what really was an animal cruelty situation, because somebody was being told by a veterinarian that there was an animal in dire need, and the veterinarian was being overruled. To this day, I feel a special responsibility to ensuring that at our organization that anyone who raises a concern gets heard out thoroughly and fully, and that those concerns, anybody that hears a concern has a responsibility to report it out and to respond to it. So I'm in a very different situation, and now all the veterinarians in our organization report to a veterinarian, except for me. I report to the president, who's not a veterinarian, and we have instituted rounds so that we can talk about each and every animal, what it's experiencing. So I hope that some of what we've done with structure and what we've done with process have made it a healthy environment to bring those concerns forward. But unfortunately, many, many organizations don't yet have that maturity of organization and recognition that the veterinarian has a certain overriding ability to recognize suffering in an animal or pain in an animal, and therefore has a certain amount of authority regardless of their actual position within the organization.
Great. Thank you, Martha. Anybody else want to comment on it? Or?
Well, I would say.
Go ahead, Sharon. This is Sharon at the Cleveland APM. One thing that we put in place, because we were finding it just with the size of our operation and all the things happening and all the different types of people involved in ensuring the welfare of the animals, and what felt at times to be different focuses coming from a different angle. Weekly, we have a kind of similar to the leadership team that was described previously, get together in a room, includes our head of veterinary services, a vet tech, our animal care, an admissions coordinator, a foster coordinator, intake coordinator, director of operations, adoption supervisor, and I'm probably leaving a couple out, but we'll get in a room together and spend typically an hour and a half, and our chief investigator, and discuss animal cases, issues, processes, areas for improvement, and everybody has the ability to voice a concern, including, and probably most primarily, our veterinary team.
So I'll let you in. I think Pam, I'm actually going to Pam, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, I think communications is key in having structures in place where concerns can come from anywhere in the organization. So for us, if anyone has a concern, if they're a staff member, it would go to their supervisor first. If the supervisor can't manage it, then they take it to the manager. If the manager can't, and depending what it is, if it's totally medically related, the vets have final say, and they set all of those protocols and procedures. And so if there's a concern about the vet themselves, then they would try and talk to them first, and then if it couldn't be resolved at that level, then it would be brought to me. And we'd sit down and talk about it and figure out what we need to change, because certainly mistakes happen, and so we like to review our policies and procedures and make sure that things are still working the way we want them to, and that we address concerns, because things change, and there's constantly new things being discovered and ways to do things that are even better, and so we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can.
Great.
I just want to add quick from your, that's all right from the organizational perspective. I mean, you just heard from 3 organizations that have set up really good structures to receive information, at least internally. From the point of view of the individual who wants to communicate the information, every organization is different. Every organization is on its own path. It really depends on leadership. Every leader is kind of in their own path and place, and all of that. And so there's really no universal rule, except I think one, which is it depends on the relationships and credibility that you as an individual have built in other contexts. So whether it's somebody in the community or somebody inside our shelter, there are people from whom I'll take almost any input and really make a high priority of listening to that and assessing our systems. There are people who could, this is terrible, but it's true. There are people who could give me the same substantive input and I wouldn't spend a minute on it. And it's just because of where I've been with them and where we've been with their organization and whether I feel that level of trust is there. So it's just about your professional reputation and relationship at that moment, and that's one of many reasons why that's well worth building.
And I think that is probably one of the best pieces of professional advice you'll get for being a veterinarian working in shelters, is to think about that in everything you do. Because in everything you do, someone will be looking to see what choice you made or how you express something or how you communicated something about an animal that they're deeply invested in. And the more that you are setting the tone for sort of who you are and what sort of person you are, and building that kind of trust, the easier it becomes to do that. The only other thing I want to add is, again, I've told you these are 4 of my favorites, and I'm not lying about that. So you would hear a really different, maybe not hear a different story from some organizations, but do be aware you would see a different story if you went to some other organizations. And so these are questions, if you're going to go work somewhere, you want to ask these questions before you start. Great.
Yeah, to that quickly, this is Sharon again. I know when I first came here, we did not have the head of veterinary services position was very new, and there was a lot of pushback from folks in the shelter who had really been the ones doing most of the decision making and very much hands-on, not with practicing veterinary medicine, but with, of course, their infectious disease protocols, animal flow, and now we add a highly qualified, knowledgeable veterinarian to the team who also has opinions and is coming at this from a different angle. So I think to Dr. Newberry's point, asking those questions and finding out what the culture of the organization is, what the willingness is to, especially if this is a new program, to include that veterinary perspective and be open to it, because it may be dramatically different from what the organization was experiencing before. And it did take a while to get everybody comfortable with what the new roles and responsibilities were.
Sometimes at the point where you are thinking about going to work somewhere is a great time to actually affect change, because they may really want you to come, and you may say, well, I'll come if you can ensure, my authority as a veterinarian, and that that my decisions won't be undermined, or my practice, my veterinary practice. It's not to say that nobody can ever say that they don't like something that the veterinarian is saying. And so sometimes you can affect that change in an organization in that way. I think there was another question. Yeah.
Yeah, this may be redundant because you might have already included the answer in your previous answer. But I was kind of
you have different strategies that you use to deal with situations like that?
So I'm going to try repeating the question. So the question is in terms of strategies for how do you, justify isn't exactly the right word, but how do you defend or justify something that maybe doesn't look pretty in the shelter, but that is meeting the animal's needs or meeting health requirements for the animal? Is that okay?
We're very, very focused on how we look.
I was going to say.
Very. And so I guess two-part answer. One, we're careful about what the public sees. And so there are kind of two ways that I can give a tour. There's our tour route, where what you see for the most part is pretty. And that's not just to avoid complaints. It's strategically important. Giving every animal on the adoption floor as long as it takes to go home is a three-part effort. You make adoption easy, you keep them healthy, and you engage the public. And so we want to send the public home saying, you won't believe that place. It's not at all what I thought it would be. It's real, you know. So in our public areas, we actually devote extra resources to making them look good, and treating that as a separate value from whether we're appropriately supporting health, because there's part 2, support health, but part 3, engage the public, is a separate exercise. But then I will, if I'm giving somebody sort of a deeper tour, especially in our wildlife area, I routinely will say, you know what, wildlife involves a lot of Rubbermaid. It's just, it's not attractive, it's not, but look what we're doing. And you just develop that, that ability to talk about it as a place where you sure could use more resources, but rest assured these animals are safe. But we just exclude the public from places where it's purely utilitarian.
For us, I think it's a top priority, obviously, to cover the basics. And we certainly have some areas that aren't pretty in our shelter that we don't like. We have these 2 cat rooms, stray cat, ISO, and quarantine, that were basically designed as closets. They're little 4x4 rooms, and there's cages, and they face each other, so if one cat sneezes, the other one's going to get sick. But I mean, we get a lot of cats every year, thousands of cats, and without having space for them, the option isn't something that we want to do. And so we go out of our way, our staff and our volunteers do what they can to make those cats comfortable, to make sure that they have the best stay possible, to get them in and out as soon as possible, and knowing that we have to do something to change that. Won't happen overnight, but we're very open about it. And when I give tours, I say, okay, we don't like these rooms, but I got to show them because it's part of who we are. When we built the building back in '99, the design has changed, and the things that have been developed for cats over the last decade have really come a long way. And so the people that we consulted with back then, you know, from what we were moving to from Pennsylvania Avenue, for those that were at that shelter here in town, I mean, it's obviously a world of difference and much improved, but now we are behind the times in what we are able to provide as far as housing at our current shelter. And so we are in the beginning stages of launching a campaign to remodel our cat areas, but it's going to take time, and under Sandra's guidance, we are going to get some great cat housing in the future. And so, but we are very open and honest about it and say we do the best we can. Obviously the cats are the priority, but you know, we are limited with the housing that we have.
What about if the problem isn't a housing problem or a facilities problem, but an actual health problem with the animal? Like a kitten who has cerebellar hypoplasia, we know that that's okay, that cat can have a good quality of life, but to the public, it's kind of horrifying.
Okay.
I've seen it before.
So she's asking a question, she's sort of redirecting the question and saying, what about for an individual animal where there's something that relates to their health, and the example is like cerebellar hypoplasia, where the kitten might, to the public, you know, seem disturbing, but you know that the kitten could have a great quality of life and be adopted and be a great pet. And Martha, I'm going to direct this one at you a little bit because I know you and I talked about this quite a bit in terms of sort of post-surgical care for foster care. You want to talk about that a little?
Sure, I have no idea what we talked about. I don't remember our conversation.
All right, never mind.
Well, when thinking about that cerebellar kitten, I can think of two different ways we'd probably try to handle it right off the bat. One is foster to adopt, so it's through one-on-one contact that kind of word of mouth and friends of friends learning about the kitten and understanding its needs and getting it adopted that way. Or office foster, so the kitten's not actually on the adoption floor and it's in the care of somebody in their office all day long, and then a prospective adopter might have heard its story or seen a picture about the kitten, and it would be brought upstairs to be introduced to the kitten, or kitten brought downstairs after there's been a discussion of the special needs of this animal. So what were you talking about, Sandra, that we talked about?
So what I was talking about that we had talked about was post-surgical care. So like if a kitten's had its eye enucleated, it's often not the most attractive thing with the kitten with the big thing and the sutures and no fur. And we had discussed that some shelters feel really uncomfortable putting those animals right up for adoption, even though we know probably the best thing for them would be to get adopted and go home. And so, you know,
oh yes, the gruesome post-enucleation.
Right. So, you want to...
and there's that, you know, there's the whole, forgive me here, I'm going to say things out loud.
Do it.
The whole horror that people are afraid of, because Sarah McLachlan commercials have portrayed the shelters as pathetic and sad behind bars. I don't want anything on our adoption floor to reinforce that, so that, you know, some people might be drawn to the fresh sutures and the fresh incision lines, but I think more people, and we're somewhat numb to it because we're used to it, we've become accustomed to seeing animals immediately post-surgery, but I think for the average adopter, that's a big slap in the face, and it's scary, and it creates a negative emotionality about visiting the animal shelter. So my preference would be to get that kitten post-enucleation into a foster home until the sutures are removed and there's a little bit of fur regrowth. So it's well on its way to recovery. But I'm in an organization that has a smaller number of animals. We handle about 3,000 a year. So we have some luxury in terms of how we manage some of these cases.
And
I recognize that.
And an excellent foster program too. Other question? Well, go ahead.
Do you ever have situations where there's maybe some conflict of interest between the veterinarian and director for what should be done during a certain health crisis or anything like that?
So the question is if there's ever, if any of them have experienced conflicts of interest between what the veterinarian thinks should be done and what the director feels is the best course of action in, for example, some kind of a health crisis.
And if so, how did you resolve it?
And how did they resolve it?
Well,
Or let me rephrase it just a little bit.
Yeah.
Or if you haven't thought of it as a conflict, how have you avoided those conflicts?
Yeah. I mean, we had, a year and a half ago, we had distemper in our shelter for quite a long time before we realized it was there, and we ended up shutting down for intake for 6 weeks. We had 117 dogs in shelter at the time. We treated them all, so it was a very big deal. In that case, we were all meeting as a leadership team literally every day and having calls with Dr. Newberry, just walking through testing and so on. We were all learning as we went. Obviously it was completely new. That was why it had gotten stuck in the shelter for so long before we fully got our arms around it. So, a true crisis actually brings out sometimes the best in most organizations, and that's not actually where it gets hard from my point of view. I think where the tension that you're talking about shows itself most often in my life is okay, we are now experts at getting healthy animals out the door fast. That's what we do. We developed, the whole building was built to support that, all of our structures, all of our policies, that's what we do. We can do that now in our sleep. But what's the next level to go out to? What are we not treating now that could be treated in the home and that we can turn to next? How do we identify that? How do we identify that without disrupting the core work that we do? Because there's nobody else in Southeast Wisconsin that can send 10,000 homeless animals home a year. And so that part is hard, and you can end up with two forms of tension. You can end up with the ED saying, how come we can't treat this? How come we can't treat this? How come we can't treat this? And the vets want to say, well, now wait a minute. But if your ED is a former litigator to whom everything sounds easy, it's a little bit hard to have that conversation. But I think you can also get the reverse, where the ED and the development folks are very, very, very super sensitized to how things look in the community, and the vets want to take some risks, and you can get going that way. So I think that's where the discussions are hardest. And again, it comes back to, from an organizational point of view, how good are your systems in talking all that through, and from an individual point of view, how good are your base relationships that you're bringing to that moment of tension.
Good point. I think one example I can share is we get a lot of requests for transfers, and so
This is a great example.
it's they come daily, and we are fortunate to have space, especially for dogs, and so trying to get systems in place to get as many in and out, as Anne was saying, as possible. But sometimes most of the time when you take a transfer, we have found you don't always know what you're going to get when they arrive. You work through creating relationships with the other organization, and usually they have way fewer resources than you have, and so even their explanation of something can be completely different than what it means to you. And so when you get the animal, it could even be a different breed of dog, we have found. So, but in some cases they say they're friendly, they're healthy, and so forth, and then they arrive and they all break with parvo or something like that. And so obviously that's a challenge, and the vets and the staff are heavily involved in that. And usually a good example is if one of my vets on staff will come and say, okay, Pam, now we've got this to deal with on top of this, and we need to isolate, and we have to have separate staff care for these dogs. We don't have the staff. What are we going to do? Your choices are, we can euthanize the pups, or we have to either hire some LTE help or somebody to come in and do it and not cross-contaminate and make sure that the rest of the population stays healthy. And so I like having the options presented to me, because then I can say, okay, well, obviously we're going to treat them, thank you, and you know how to obviously have the expertise to do it, so set it up, we'll get somebody hired, we'll have them do the cleaning and take care of them so we can save the pups and find them new homes. And so the opposite is, if I've had vets over the years where they don't present me with the options, or they just say, no, we can't do it, and leave me with no other. I like to have, can you give me what are my choices? Because I don't know, I don't have that expertise. I count on the vets to provide that to me and give me those options, and then we can work together in figuring out what the best plan is. And usually it does require more resources, which I'm fully aware of, but if we're going to save the animals and we're able to, then that's what I want to do. And so that's how I work it out that I have.
Yeah, I think those are great. That's another really good sort of advice point for being a shelter veterinarian, that if you just say it can't be done, which is probably my least favorite thing in the world to hear, then it frustrates other people, I think. And if you say, well, if we were going to do it, I think it's a much better thing to say.
Yes.
If we were going to do it, we would need to have X, Y, and Z. Becomes a really different conversation, because you're not saying we can't do it. You're saying we could do it if we have X, Y, and Z. Can you give me X, Y, and Z? And a lot of the time, the answer to that is yes. Or what if I could only give you X and Y? Could you make that work? And so those are ways. I think that's another really good point from this. Yeah, Sarah.
So kind of in the same vein, it sounds like most of you guys have either multiple veterinarians or at least multiple veterinary professionals, whether it be technicians or veterinarians. How approach a situation where you have differing opinions on either what treatment or protocols should be used for either a group, such as admission intake, or an individual case, when you have two equally qualified veterinary professionals butting heads.
Great. Sharon, are you still there?
I am. I'm having a little trouble hearing.
So the question this time, and I just, because I hadn't heard from you in a little bit, I thought I'd have you start first on this one, is what do you do if you have two different veterinary professionals, maybe either two vets or two techs or something, who don't agree? What do you do?
And agree about what? About basic treatment?
About a treatment course for an animal? That's the question? Yep. About a course of treatment for an animal, or maybe even an intervention in a larger, animal health situation.
I have to say, and perhaps it's because our team is smaller and has very defined roles, that I don't know that we've really had that between veterinarians. We have one shelter veterinarian. The others are surgeons. One of the surgeons does fill in as the shelter veterinarian, but those two have such a fantastically supportive relationship and tend to agree on things that I guess I feel very lucky that we've not had that happen, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay.
They're a good team.
If our two vets came to me and they couldn't work it out or make the decision, then I would seek outside.
Then they'd ask me.
Come back with
The tiebreaker.
Yeah.
We actually are putting in place now a new structure just to deal with conversations that are in this topic. So when I started, all of our vets were based at Milwaukee, and one vet with a senior vet from the team went up to Ozaki sometimes. So they just worked as a team, and we didn't have those issues. But now we have location issues. And so the idea of the vet team at each location making their own decisions could lead us to a result where life or death might depend on which of our shelters you came to, and we can't let that happen. So is this animal suitable for foster? Is this a condition that we're able to treat right now on our current foster resources? Things like that really need to be consistent across campuses, and if we don't have fosters in Ozaki right now, but this is something that we could treat with a Racine foster, if we had any, we'll get there, then these are things that we need to treat across campuses. So we had in place a very well-established vertical, triangular, hierarchical structure, and now what we're building across that is cross-campus substantive teams with a person identified as the head of that team across the campuses who's responsible for, not always that person is the tiebreaker if they disagree, it shouldn't be like that, but making sure they're having the right conversations about the right issues, that they're getting to consensus about policies like that, and we're just laying that out right now. It's actually quite a bit harder than I thought it would be. I keep saying it's just being effective across the dotted line, and in my old life, we didn't have any solid lines, it was all dotted lines, and so it's actually been a journey for me to understand how to help people have the tools to make things happen, even though they might not have a reporting relationship with the person that they're trying to make this work with. But I think we'll be the better for it, not just in vet, but we're doing it in behavior, in adoption. Would we adopt to a person like this if they came into Milwaukee, and if they came into Ozaki? The answer better be yes. Just in all of our substantive departments, we're working that out. And the last thing I'll throw in is, then the responsibility for making that happen is part of the performance expectations for a set of given people. And being responsible for the quality of that team is just as much the lead vet's responsibility as being responsible for the quality of his own veterinary work.
Great. So I'm going to throw out a question because I think many vet students I've met have been really surprised by the level of care that's provided in shelters. A lot of you, it seems like, have had a fair amount of experience in shelters, but I'm wondering if I can get each of you to sort of talk about what kinds of medical things you do. Obviously, I know you're not veterinarians, except for Martha, but I think you have a fair understanding of sort of what gets done medically in your shelters and what kinds of things are getting treated. Sharon, you want to kick this off?
Sure, so what kind of treatments we provide?
Yeah.
Very, boy, it almost is getting to be, you name it, we'll try it. It's almost easier to go backwards and say we're not treating cancer, we're not doing exorbitantly expensive procedures unless we can find somebody to donate services. I mean, we are doing amputations, we're doing orthopedic surgeries. We've also developed a phenomenal relationship with a local private veterinarian who used to be on our board, who helps us with some of these second chance program surgeries if our own veterinarians for some reason don't feel comfortable with doing a particular surgery. So again, I'm choking. Of course, upper respiratory treatment, kennel cough treatment, mange. We're even dealing with some parvo if we can find foster homes, ringworm. Again, if we can find dedicated foster homes that can manage that kind of thing. We have a dog that we reached out to our community, came in with a traumatic amputation of a rear paw. We're fitting that dog with a prosthetic paw. Another that came in probably with distemper and a congenitally absent front limb that we sent out to foster for physical therapy in a cart. And so we're really, the scope of care we're able to provide is really only limited by a decision-making that involves, do we have the resources to provide that care? And it's not just financial resources, it's also the proper environment for that animal to rehabilitate for whatever period of time needs to happen. So that's where the foster program comes in. I know that's a very general answer, but it's difficult. There really isn't anything contagious disease continues to be our most challenging issue. Everything else, if our veterinarians feel the temperament of the animal is fantastic, or at least good, and it's something that we can take care of and we have a place to rehabilitate the animal, they're game for trying it and we're game for having them do it.
That's great, and thank you also for talking about the different veterinary relationships. So we've talked a lot about being a veterinarian in the shelter, but there's lots of veterinary relationships in the communities that contribute to that treatment too. I'd love to hear from everybody on this one.
So we do a lot of the similar things that she was saying. We have a ringworm treatment program in a separate building, and we're in the process of creating an isolation in part of it, so we'll have a second isolation area. We're dividing it in half, and we're going to use it that way. So if we get cats or kittens that break with something that's highly contagious, we'll have another isolation area for them. I think we even, like she said, we adopt, it's kind of case by case. If there's certain situations, and I can't think of the medical term that this dog had. We have a dog named Cleo. It's some sort of neurological disorder that she has. I don't know if you remember, Sandra, what it's technically called.
I think it might be wobblers.
Wobblers, okay. And so we came up with a plan, and she's really not showing symptoms right now. She's happy, healthy. She's only 6 months old, and so what we did is we launched a campaign. We raised some funds. We put her up for adoption, and she got adopted last week. And
Nadine made a video.
Nadine made the video, so people are well aware that she has this. And there are other diagnostics that could further be done, but they were going to cost between $3,000 and $5,000. Obviously, we didn't have those type of resources, but the people were willing to take that on and then decide when the time comes if they're able to. But at this time, she has a high quality of life, and she's in a good home. And so we try to explore every option that we have for animals that have medical issues like that. And we treat what we can and try and get them into homes.
For us too, it's a lot quicker to list what we don't treat than what we do. So routinely, orthopedics, URI, most skin issues, normally we treat. I'd say a couple things. One, we will do an amputation where a private owner might do a more complicated orthopedic surgery sometimes, and so it's not just what you treat, but how. And then I think where things get really frustrating is the stuff that's really not that terrible, but it's just really hard to manage in the shelter. So we don't treat ringworm nearly as often as I would like to, although I've managed it in my own home without a lot of problems. And the other issue that feels like that is where the diagnostics themselves will be expensive. So this could be an easy problem, but it's going to cost a lot to find out. And those often end up with outcomes that feel really disappointing because you just can't manage how you're going to house, just in case it's this, while you pay for this and wait for tests to come back for this. So that can be very difficult. And the last thing I will just go ahead and say the P word. Pit bulls are difficult. Obviously they have this, from the vet's point of view, treating a pit bull dog is pretty much the same as any other dog, depending on how well the dog kennels. But the issue is the number of adopters who are going to be lining up for that dog when you're done. And we're forced to be realistic about that. We adopt out, hundreds of pit bulls a year, but there are many, many, many others dying in our community, and so we do look at the eventual adoptability of the dog as we make these decisions, and I just have to say that's true. And we all look for a day when we won't have to do that.
Martha, you still there?
I echo what my colleagues are saying here. It's really, we are reaching now higher and higher, as you refer to it, the higher hanging fruit when it comes to addressing physical challenges and medical challenges. So we're doing a lot of surgical correction to include cruise ship repairs and all kinds of fractures, because our rescue department is constantly picking broken animals up. And we've even gotten to the point where we are able to stabilize some chronic endocrine disorders like Addison's. Although hyperthyroidism is incredibly prevalent here in our older cat population, if we have a super cat that just is going to sell himself or herself, we'll even go so far as to get those animals on treatment. But again, the very same issue is there in terms of how much can our adopting population absorb. There aren't that many homes that are willing to take on those animals. So we also don't want to be known as the house of broken toys. So we try to look at the general composition of what's on the adoption floor right now, who we have available for foster, and what's our sort of general adoptable capacity right now. So it's always, every animal is an individual, but every animal is always considered within the context of the overall population, both the animals in the community, the animals in the facility, and the people in the community, including our foster homes. So I always like to think of it as though I'm looking at a fecal flotation on the microscope, and I'm going from high power to low power. I want to zoom in, and I want to see that egg, and I want to zoom out, and I want to see the whole field. So it's kind of constantly looking at your forest and looking at your trees.
Nice.
I think you've made an excellent point in that and this is far from a blanket statement because there are always exceptions, but I guess one of the things we look at is whatever we're looking at something that is quote unquote curable or easily manageable, so that an adopter coming in is going to be deterred by what they might be taking on. And you can easily argue that an animal missing a limb that could develop other problems down the road could present that, but it doesn't seem to. But things like diabetes, epilepsy, some of the other kind of more chronic disease states, I know we find you just don't have that population of adopters walking through the door looking to take that on, sadly.
So thank you all. This has been really interesting, I hope, for the students, interesting for me. One of the things I think that's been most fascinating for me watching over the last 10 or 15 years is the level of treatment and how it's evolving in shelters over time, and watching shelters, as Martha said, sort of reach higher and higher up on the tree, being able to treat more and more the number of shelters that are able to effectively treat animals for ringworm or to treat animals for parvo has been growing and growing, and it's incredibly exciting. I think I think it was Anne who said, or maybe Sharon, about infectious disease still being the kind of sticky wicket, and I think that's definitely true for everyone, because when you start to think about if X, Y, and Z were true, it's hardest to make those things happen.
I would add one thing too. It seems like over the last few years, animals coming in that are being surrendered are surrendered with more medical problems and specifically dental issues.
Yeah.
Really skyrocketed, where we're going to be putting up a dental suite just to try and keep up with it all.
Yeah, so Pam, talking about dentistry, I mean, one of the things is that as our ability to treat evolves, our understanding of what needs treatment evolves as well, and dentistry in veterinary medicine has been evolving at an incredibly rapid pace. So, 10 years ago, really, you could adopt out an animal by just cleaning its teeth and adopting it out, and nobody would think there was anything wrong with that. Now, people would say, wait a minute, this animal has FRL lesions, and, and it needs these extractions, and if you do the extractions without radiography, and so the context of practice has changed as well, and so the expectation gets higher. The other thing that happens is in each community, as you're doing a better and better job, there's less low-hanging fruit. And the fruit that comes in is, from higher up on the tree. So to me, that's all really exciting. I think the other huge thing that's happened that goes along with that is we know more and more about how to do these things effectively. We didn't know that much about what to do if parvo outbreaked in a shelter, 20 years ago. Now, if I get a call, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what to do if there's a distemper outbreak in a shelter. And Wisconsin Humane was one of the most amazing examples, because it was actually the first shelter where we said, let's try treating and see what happens. And it worked incredibly well. And so from doing that, we've collected a huge amount of information that we can say the next time it happens, we can apply everything we learned the last time. And so we've developed this body of knowledge in terms of treating infectious disease and understanding, what are the risks? And with the Dane County Humane Society Ringworm Program, what we're looking at right now is we know if we do, and I'll keep going back to X, Y, and Z, we know if we do X, Y, and Z, it works out great. But what we really want to know is, what if we only do X? Is that good enough? Because if only X is good enough, probably more shelters could do it. And so we're sort of always pushing those boundaries to see, well, how safe do we need to be? Can we back off a little, and what happens if we do? But obviously always wanting to do those kinds of things and find that information carefully. So if you can't tell, I think it's really exciting practicing veterinary medicine in shelters. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Sharon and Martha, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, you guys.